Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
How are you today?
I am doing well, thank you. How are
What?
you?
Uh, Doing as best I can every day.
All right.
Um, Thank you so much for agreeing to chat with me. It's very good to have you here with us. May I ask you, please tell us your name?
Yes, my name is Scottie Sewell. Um, I go by Scottie. My full name is Francis Scott Sewell.
Mm, I think were they expecting a boy or something? That's an interesting name,
Um, well, back in the day, they didn't know,
right?
but ahead of time, unlike we with our daughters. But I think I was named after both on my father's side, his mother, and my mother's side, her sister. That was the Francis, and so they went with a nickname, and it was there on my birth announcement that I would be called Scottie. So
A very, very nice name. May
thank
I
you.
ask you to share a little bit about yourself? You can talk about your career, you can talk about your education, your experiences, anything you feel comfortable sharing.
Sure. So I was born in 1964 in Alabama. So we can go back there in terms of my parents and expecting a boy or a girl. Um, we only lived there for a couple of years while my father was a Presbyterian minister at a church there. And then we moved back for them to North Carolina. So I grew up both in North Carolina, and then my parents divorced when I was pretty young, and my father moved to Colorado. And so, along with a brother and a sister, we spent most summers out in Colorado and with our father and family there, and then would come back here in the school year, and were raised here in North Carolina with my mom and eventually stepfather. So those were early years. So I claimed two home states, North Carolina and Colorado, and went to college and graduate school in Washington, D.C., and worked in Washington, D.C. for a number of years, and then met my husband there. And when we decided we wanted to get married and have kids, we moved back for me to Colorado, where I continued working for the federal government while he went to graduate school. Had two daughters there. And then when he finished, he applied in several places for university positions and was hired here at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So for me, it was moving back to North Carolina, and fortunately, with two children at the time, getting to be closer to my mother and stepfather. So that was nice. And when we left Denver, I quit the job that I had there and moved here, and we decided to have a third child. And so I did the stay-at-home mother volunteer thing for several years until we started our own consulting business, which I continue to do now. I'm a consultant working with what we call public purpose organizations. So I work with nonprofits and with local government boards.
Okay. Let me ask you,
And I don't know if I'm freezing up, but
I hear there is a little bit of freeze there, but we'll get to it. What exactly do you do? What is your title? Or I mean, you said as a consultant, are you your own business or are you a part of another organization? Can you talk a little bit about that? And then can you tell us what you went to college, what your degrees you earned in college?
okay. Yeah, so I'm an independent consultant. My business is called Leading and Governing Associates. And we work with nonprofits. That's primarily who I work with. And then my husband has also worked with all types of associations of elected boards and elected officials in state, county, and sometimes local government. And we work on a number of things, but in particular, I work to try and help boards work more effectively together
Mhm,
and to engage with their community stakeholders
mhm.
uh, to what I like to say, create their preferred future. So to try and figure out what do they want to do and where do they want to head and how do they want to successfully navigate that way. Um, my degrees were in, my undergraduate degree was International Affairs and Communications from George Washington University in Washington, D.C. And then my graduate degree is a master's in public administration from American University, also in Washington, D.C.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I have a master's in public administration too. I've never put it to very good use, but it is one of those things. I've shied away from having a degree in my career field because most of that changes so rapidly that whatever I would learn wouldn't be applicable by the time I got to another job.
Mhm.
So let me ask you this. So growing up in the South as a woman, what were the experiences that you had? And did you always see yourself as belonging and a part of a community, or did you sometimes feel yourself were left out on the outside looking in?
I would say, looking back on my childhood, and particularly when I was a teenager, I very much felt on the outside looking in. Um, as a woman, um, again, because I spent time in a more urban place in the summers in Denver, Colorado, it was always a transition going back and forth between the family I had here and the family I had there, from a place in Denver where, you know, my friends and I, we could kind of roam the neighborhood. There were sidewalks, there was public transportation, you could go places. I had a lot more independence, I felt like, when I was living in Colorado, compared to when I would be back here in North Carolina and in the Triangle. And um, often felt like an outsider looking in too, because the neighborhood in Denver where my parents lived was definitely more integrated than the neighborhood in North Carolina where I lived. And so I was very aware of race at a very young age, and how that impacted and affected relationships that I had with people,
How,
depending
how,
on who
how
they
were you aware of it? What do you mean by that? So, I mean, were there instances or something that stood out to you that made race an issue, or was it just that you know, would overhear or experience things from people around you?
It would be towards me, sometimes bullying if I had friends who were of a different race than I was. Um, and then also hearing it, other people called names or being bullied because of their race.
So I think my daughter lived in the DC area for a long time, and I have an aversion to anything that is in DC because of the traffic. It is probably the worst traffic besides Atlanta that I've ever seen in the world. But
Yes.
um, I found it to be a very diverse place, a complete melting pot of personalities. And I know they often say that of New York, but New York in a lot of ways is segmented in that you have people who live in this, you know, you have Chinatown and you have, you know, this group and this group, but DC seemed to be a blend of everyone everywhere. You know, sometimes I think the separation may have occurred financially, but was never by race or gender. Was that your experience as well there?
Yes, in a lot of respects, I felt like working in the federal government, particularly so. I wouldn't say necessarily so my university, unless it was diversity in terms of international
Yep.
students. But then once working for the federal government, absolutely. People were coming from all over the country to work in Washington, D.C. And being a civil servant was very different, I think, than if you came there as, you know, a political appointee of a particular administration, that kind of thing. So I felt very comfortable working for the federal government because of a lot of things, but you know, I really appreciated how many different people from different backgrounds you could get to know and get to work with. So that
I think
that
your statement about universities hasn't changed very much. I did a chat last weekend with a young woman who had graduated from a predominantly high-rated U.S. News and World Report university, predominantly white. And the stories, and if you listen to any of the chats that I have done thus far, many students of color talk about the struggle to survive and achieve when you're expected to do so in a predominantly white university. So I can't imagine what it must have been like for you. And so that leads me to this question: what does it mean to be a white woman? You know, what are your experiences with that label, if that's applicable? But you know, because we hear a lot of these terms about supremacy and elitism and all that stuff. How do you define being white? Are you privileged? Are you a part of an elite society? Are you supreme or superior to other groups? How do you define yourself?
I definitely define myself as a white woman. I think for a lot of my life, I thought of myself as a female first. And didn't, I mean, I was aware of race, and I think, yes, felt, privileged or lucky to have been born white. And also, I think even to this day, feel like as a woman, get overlooked, get mansplained, get man interrupted, get, those kinds of things too. So I have an experience of what it's like to be taken for granted. And I think that allows me some level of empathy when talking to, creating relationships with people of color and Black people. Which is very important to me. So it's continued to be, for me, very important to have diverse friends and people, and by that I mean not just based on race, but with different backgrounds and different interests, because I really enjoy and feel my life is richer from that perspective. But I also know that it's much easier for me to move through this world as a white person.
I will say that, the sentence you said about, having diverse friends, it's almost like a qualifier. And so, one of the things that as a Black person I hear a lot is I have Black friends. It's one of those statements that's actually a null statement. You didn't say anything to me. In fact, you may have raised your race card, if you will, by saying that, because I don't know what you mean by you have Black friends, and your statement about, I think privilege is probably accurate, because you probably can achieve and move about the economic world and the workplace easier than I can. And I think from what you said, you just have your master's degree. I have my doctor's degree, and I have not achieved the level of success that you have. I think we're close in age, so it's one of those things where, as a person of color, specifically a woman of color, it's a struggle every single day. And one of the things I have been, focusing on very much in my chats lately is get women to stop seeing each other as competitors, but to see each other as community, and not to allow any of the constructs to come in with it, whether you're white, Black, brown, whatever, whether you're gay or not, whatever, but just to see each other as a community, because we don't pay attention how easily men do that. They do it. It's almost seamless. New person, old person, someone they've gone to school with, someone they haven't talked to in years. They create their community of maleness with little effort, where we struggle, right? We're competing for men, we're competing for jobs, we're competing for pay, we're competing. And I think if we can really reverse that mindset, women may actually get a foothold and won't be man interrupted or man overspoken. We call that he-peat, it isn't a thing until a man says it, but because I think that there's been so much division among race, but also among the genders, right? So for years we were anti-gay and whatever a person's, sexual choices were, and I think every time we get an opportunity to divide ourselves by something, whether it's the color of our skin, the color of our eyes, our sexual orientation, whatever it is, it gives more latitude to men, because you're separated. You're not going to be that mighty fist. And I can't remember the quotation, but it says, when they came for me, there was no one left. And I think that's one of those things that women really need to think about, is how to partner with each other to support each other, advocate for each other, and to be inclusive of each other, and not just say, okay, well, I've got a couple of friends over there, I'll go have wine or tea with them, but actually become advocates for them. So.
Yes. And I'm forgetting exactly where I was reading this or listening to this. It could have even been in one of your diversity chats. But surrounding yourself with women who will speak of you to others, share your name with others, amplify
Yep.
And I feel I do that in my friendships, try very hard to do that in my friendships. I was going to ask you, I wasn't sure, we connected via LinkedIn. We didn't know each other prior to this chat. How exactly you came to invite me to do one of these diversity chats. But it may have been a friend of a friend who said, talk to Scottie. I don't know.
No, people who I know, I ask, but I also do a lot of time researching people to see who they are, what they're doing, the kind of work that they're doing. Because, while we have the media who's constantly telling us how to think, breathe, act, and, what to do, it is hearing our own stories, our own experiences that will help us, um, hearing you talk about your education and your time in the federal government and then the work you do now, there's some young woman or young man even who may hear this and say, hey, I can do that too. And I think that's what we're really missing in our society are these role models. And when we define real role models by race or gender, I think we're doing a disservice because there's a lesson to be learned from everything that we do. I told someone this the other day. So when President Broadhead was the president of Duke University, I got to know him very well. A lovely, lovely man. And he said something to me that has stuck with me my entire career. He said, we are the sum total of the people we meet along the way. And I just thought that was such a phenomenal statement because, we pick up little pieces of people and we kind of stick them onto ourselves and it kind of helps us shape who we are and who we become. And I think that's the case. And so when I went looking for you, because someone had mentioned you to me, and I don't remember who it was, but someone had mentioned you to me. And I said, well, let me go do a little research to see what I can find out. And when I found out about your work for nonprofits, it really spiked my interest because I really wanted to know where that fit along, Black and brown business owners, women business owners, where's your work there? And is there a pro bono aspect to it? Because I'm sure, a lot of nonprofits, they're the ones that have gazillions of dollars, but majority of them are struggling, to get by. So how do you decide who you support and what are the criteria and the results once you supported an organization?
Yes, well, all good questions. And I'll just say that when you said, that you see I have success that you haven't achieved, I see the opposite. I just want you to know, I think you are incredibly successful. And I tell younger folks who are wanting to be consultants. So if anybody calls and asks me and wants to have coffee or do in this time of the pandemic a Zoom chat and just, talk about, how does one become a consultant or who can I refer them to if I hear of any jobs, I'm happy to do that. Ask, I will talk to anybody for free, as I say, because I do work with very small, not very well resourced often nonprofits. And over the years, one of the things I've learned I need to do is help them find funding in order to be able to work with me or work with their community around capacity building. So that's a piece of it too. I think if you work with really large national nonprofits or maybe even in some cases statewide nonprofits, it might be more financially lucrative, but I don't find that to be so. But I love what I do, and I love working with people and helping them connect with, in the case of a nonprofit, an executive director more effectively with their board members with each other. And then it's really important, I think, that we all realize that you can't change the world alone.
Mm-hmm.
And so you need to really think in systemic terms and who in your community you should be reaching out to and building and working with, because I think similar to women, nonprofits in particular often feel like, I have to do this, and they don't do that networking to figure out who needs to be in support of the good things that they're doing. They don't necessarily know how to talk about what they're doing as well as they might. So I do a lot of work around that to help them boost their name and their calling out there.
That's wonderful. I appreciate that. And if when we chat and the chat is concluded, I'm going to send you an email. And if you'll send me back your company name, I will add that to the LinkedIn discussion, and people can pick up on that and contact you. You don't have to put your personal information, just your company name. And I'm sure they can find it from there to do business with you, or to find out how they can help you, or you help them. So I think that's very important. So my other question is one of these questions that I toy with every time I do one of these diversity chats. So as a Black person, I was born in 1958, and I was born in New York, but I was raised in the Deep South, the rural Deep South. And I knew extreme poverty, and I knew harsh racism. And so after May 25th, when Mr. Floyd was murdered, I mean, there was a lot of talk among white people about this topic, you know, about police killings and about the inadequacies of our society to allow Black and brown people to succeed successfully in this, you know, this America. And one of the things that came to mind was, you know, Ellis Island, right? So, you know, early on, anybody from anywhere could come into America through Ellis Island, and there you go, put your footprint down. As much as the government would help you, they would help you, and you became American citizens, and there you go. And so Mr. Floyd was killed. And then right in the middle of that, we had DACA, right? So the Border Patrols were locking up and separating children from their parents. And one of the things that I have spent a lot of time researching is the trauma that happens to people when other people affect them negatively. So there's been several studies, some out of Harvard, Johns Hopkins, all over the place, talking about the PTSD of slavery and the Holocaust, the Japanese internment camps, and all these different things, right? So, and we never really kind of explore that, because that's right on the scholarship level, right? It's not in the everyday vernacular. We're not talking about it every day. We're not reading about it. So we don't, we don't explore that very often. But, you know, we're all aware of what PTSD is, and, you know, we assume it comes from some immediate trauma, but not how it can be embedded on your gene pool and then transferred generation upon generation per generation. So why now does diversity seem to be a hot topic for white people? Why are they aware now?
That is a great question. Well, I will say for me personally, as I was saying, it's been something I've been aware of, and sometimes more present with me than other times, which again is privilege, right? Right before the current president was elected, in this part of North Carolina at the very least, there started to be a lot more interest in racial equity discussions and in how organizations were thinking about it. And I signed up to take the Racial Equity Institute's phase 1 course. This was before they started their groundwater course. And I got to participate in it the weekend after the 2016 election. Mm-hmm. And so for me, that was, I mean, I think the people that had signed up for that training were still in shock over the outcome of that election. And it was a very emotional experience in some ways, though a very important one. So I would say, even prior to the last 4 years, there was starting to be a recognition about the disparities, particularly in the nonprofit and I would say in the public education sector, that we just weren't fixing or turning the corner or understanding what we needed to do so that every child would succeed, let's say, in life. And so I think there was a lot of self-reflection that was starting. And there was an openness, at least in the nonprofit sector, and at least in this corner of North Carolina, to having those conversations. The last 4 years has just, for, again, folks, I think, who really do care about others and want to make the world a better place for all, a need to start soul searching. And I think as a white person, really coming to terms with how you have benefited from the color of your skin, and wanting, for me, how do I then figure out how to get out of the way and also support and help create ways with people who are, of different race or different opportunities in life that I haven't had. And sometimes that's really hard because, of course, I want to be successful as a person, right? But I'm having to realize that it's important to remember that I want my community and my country and the people in my lives to also be successful. And so again, not seeing these as individual competitions, but trying to think more and more, how do we do this together as a community, as a people, as human beings? For me is why this is such a much more present time around thinking about race and injustice and social justice.
A lot of folks have raised the issue of, well, we have COVID, we're in a pandemic, we have to stay home, so we get to watch more TV and read more, so we're able to read more. But I when I think about that, I'm not sure I even think that's a fair summary of why we are where we are. I went to school, as I said, I was raised in the rural South, and I was expected to do nothing but get pregnant, have a bunch of children, and be like the other inferior people in my community. I was told so many times I wasn't smart enough. I mean, even in present day, when I thought about jobs I wanted to have, people have said, well, you don't have the skills to do that, but everything I've ever done in my career, I've been successful at doing it. So, maybe I haven't had the title of chief operating officer or chief, president or a chancellor, whatever it is, but I've not failed. But somehow or another, I'm pigeonholed in that because I am the stereotyped angry Black woman, of course. And at any moment, my emotions are going to get the best of me, and I'm going to fly off the handle. So, and I think that for me, like if we could look at our society, not just to look at slavery or the Holocaust or the Japanese internment camps, what we are supposed to be, America, what we are supposed to be, is supposed to be a society of inviting, welcoming gatherers. And we are not that. We are a society of dividers. We are a society of conquerors, who's on top and who has this. And it's one of the reasons why I believe so strongly that women must find a way to unite, to help each other in whatever way you can. I mean, maybe you can't call up someone and says, hey, give Rochelle a job, or let Rochelle sit on that board. But, when you're out and about and talking, I have this friend, I think she might be a good person to think about, and that conversation is raised over and over again. And same with what I said to you earlier, in this chat, I want people to know about your organization so you can grow, and I think that kind of, I don't know whether it's dichotomous or very, I don't know where the rubber meets the road, but when you have those kinds of things, when both persons or groups are looking out for each other, there is a better chance that we all succeed as opposed to just one of us succeeding. So I have been really advocating for women to stop seeing each other as competitors or seeing each other as better or less than based on some skin or eye color or hair texture criteria. We are human beings. And I always tell people, exactly, right? The best example of diversity is Mother Nature. I mean, you walk outside your house and you look, there's not a single type of pine tree or magnolia tree or whatever kind of tree it is. There are a gazillion. Same thing with all the little creatures and things. There's not just one kind of bird, not one kind of dog. Mother Nature is diversity. And that's how we should see it. And somehow with all of that diversity, they live in perfect harmony. And I'll tell you a little story. When my son was younger, he watched, there was a television show that came on about lemurs. He watched this show like religiously. He even had a little lemur around the house he walked around the house with. And we learned so much from our son because, you know, the first time we heard the word capybara, you know, maybe he pronounced the word right. Maybe he was trying to say something else, you know, but, you know, we went and looked at it and, you know, he gave us the most simple explanation that I think has really stuck with me as I've grown, you know, like the carnivores and the herbivores live in the same space. The carnivores are going to get some wins and the herbivores are going to get some wins. But the balance of nature allowed them to live together without anyone feeling more superior or more inferior than another. And you take the dinosaur age, right? So you've got T-Rex with all those giant steak knife teeth and, you know, claws and all that stuff. But given the right set of odds, he could die if he ran up on the right group of herbivores, right? So, you know, that we don't think about ourselves like the universe does, like Mother Nature does, is that we all can exist together in this pot of whatever it is that we are, and that we have times where we just coexist, not for the benefit of me being better or you better, you being richer, me being poorer, but that we exist for the good of the universe. You know, that we exist to make our society better. We exist because we are linked by commonality, like, you know, our gene pool between you and I, you know, so you're a white woman, I'm a black woman. But what we have so little that's not in common, more that is. So why in the world are we putting so much emphasis on separating ourselves from each other?
Well, interestingly, so part of my work also builds on the work of my husband and another person that he has worked with around the public values of American representative democracy. And so, you know, I think culture has a lot to do with it too, and talk about PTSD and systemic issues. The mental models that we all walk around with about the way the world is, or how we think about ourselves, or how we think about comporting ourselves or organizing our society, has a lot to do with why I think we are so polarized and moving apart in some respects. And so quickly, one of the framework around these public values is sort of a compass. And so at the North Star, we have liberty, and the I, and independence and freedom, and, you know, self-determination, and the pull yourself up by the bootstraps kind of. And in American culture, it is the way, right? And that, along with prosperity and the free market and thinking about efficiencies and effectiveness, and has really been a part of, I would say, white culture and white supremacy. And so we've gone way too far in that direction, and we teach for individual success. We don't educate people, I think, as well on community and the values of community and equality, which are the other two of the four big bucket values of American culture. And so, you know, and you can't be all free and all equal. Right. You can't be on your own and in a community solely. And so you have to find the right balance of all four of those. And I think right now we're just really in a struggle. There's a lot of tension between this sort of individual free market with the equality, community, equity polls. And so those are things I really enjoy talking to public and elected officials about in particular, because I think you need to be able to have those conversations if you're ever going to understand why we're struggling right now, and get away from, you know, fighting about who's more conservative or who's more liberal or who's, you know, a Democrat or who's, you know, a Republican, which is not helpful. It's more understanding this complexity and being able to say, well, what's the right balance in our society at this time? But we're not very capable of having those conversations.
It's still a lot of work to do.
Yes, there will always be work to do, right?
Right. Yeah. I will say we are lucky in Durham. We have a great mayor, Steve Schewel. He's a lovely man. always available and ready to help his community. And I think that's an example of what, if politics is going to play a game, that's the type of politics it should be. I'm not abreast of all the things that go on behind closed doors, but his public front-facing self is so inviting and so warm and so sensitive that it makes you just want to be around him and support him in anything that he does. And for me, that's strange for politicians, because all the politicians I've worked with and worked for over the years, I was the secretary for the Durham Democratic Party for a long time. I've done lots of stuff like that at work, got fundraising campaigns and all that stuff. It seems like a lot of people have just been engaged in selfism, right? So I want to be this. So for myself, and I can get the best life insurance and health insurance for life, as opposed for the constituents in which they serve. So I think there's still a lot of work to be done. So we have about 7 minutes. I'm going to ask you one question, and then I'm going to leave the remainder of time to you. So my question is this: if you could change one thing about our society, whether you pick the United States, the globe, whatever, what one thing do you think we should do to be better of accepting and understanding each other?
Wow, that's a big question. And I think, and there's my dog's about to bark because there's dogs walking by, but I just really couldn't think of one thing, because it's a complicated world that we live in. And, I watched some of the other diversity chats. I watched your one on Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and I thought that was brilliant. I think if I could change one thing, it would be to open people all over the world to do more reflection. Just be quiet, be in the middle of the woods, just be for a little bit, and see what comes to you, and have more metaphysical and deep thoughts, rather than so much do. We just need to pull back. Is that a good answer? I don't know, but
I think it's an excellent answer. But there are, like I tell everyone, there is no right or wrong answers to any of this. We are all still finding our way, so I think that's the case. So I leave the balance of the time to you to share anything you want. If you want to talk about your business, if you want to talk about some projects you're working on, if you want to share some things you think you want us to know about you, or anything we can do to help you. So I leave the balance of time to you.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. First off, this has been enjoyable. And I really, I would encourage anybody who's watching this diversity chat to go and look at all of the diversity chats that you have created, because there are some incredible people out there.
Really?
If you can only pick two, I would say watch the one that you did by yourself. That was very powerful, Dr. Newton, and very hard to watch, but I think very important if people want to know you. So thank you for being so brave to put that out for others to watch. And then the other one would be the one with you and Drew Stinnett on Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and technology. And again, so much, I think, and I try and do this with any organization that I work with or community that I work with, is to help people think about the decisions that they're making or the good that they're trying to achieve, and how can you do that without harming the good you already have. And so I think that is true in technology. It is certainly true in policy. And so to me, I think you need to be able to find people that can support and be in that journey with you, and not believe that you're the one right person for the job, that no one person can successfully advance on their vision for the future. It should be one that you have created and support with others. So again, bringing people in, trying to have these conversations, thinking about things from somebody else's perspective. That's what I want to leave everybody here on this chat with. It's just so important to the future.
Well, I thank you so much for that. I ask you two favors. My first is to subscribe to the channel and ask others to chat with me. I think you can tell them that it's not onerous. I mean, maybe a bit sometimes uncomfortable, but I try not to make it too uncomfortable. I try to think fairly about these things on both sides. It's hard to kind of find that delicate balance where you're not putting someone in an uncomfortable position, especially when this is not their forte or anything, and so I ask you, please subscribe to my channel and ask others to chat with me. And they can find everything there is to know about me on LinkedIn, the good, bad, and the ugly. It's all out there. So you want to find out who they're chatting with.
Absolutely.
Yep.
I can absolutely do that, and we'll do that. So thank you. And I hope our paths cross in the future as well.
Absolutely. In fact, I have a question to ask you. So I'm going to end the recording because I do have a question I want to ask you that
Okay.
I want on the recording. So thank you. As soon as the recording converts, I'm going to send you a link to it. Please listen to it and let me know if I may upload it. If not, we can do it over or whatever you think makes sense. Okay.
Sounds good.
I'm going to start recording now so I can ask you my questions.
Okay.